Welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about my point of view on the strategic role of service design in organizations mostly. I just want to give a quick overview of the expectations for today for this session. We have around 90 minutes. I'm going to try to use your time as much as possible, and I hope you find some value in what I have to share today. And what I want to start doing is I want to share the point of view. So it will be a presentation, but I will open for discussion at some point, probably multiple points. We'll see how it goes. And then from there, which should last around 40 to 50 minutes, we'll do a quick 10-minute break, bio break, however you want to take the break. And then we'll come back. And when we come back, I've planned a hands-on activity where I asked for you to have pen and paper at hand. If anything goes wrong digitally, we can do it on paper. So please make sure you have pen and paper at hand. And also, as I'm talking about the point of view, feel free to jot down some thoughts, some questions. If you want to write the questions on chat, feel free to do that as well. And then my expectation for today, and I want to make sure you're aligned with me on this, is I want you to gain some interesting insights about what I have to share for the strategic role of a service designer in organizations. And then I want to give you the opportunity to begin to build your own version of this with the exercise I have planned. And then hopefully you'll be able to start, if you're at the beginning of your career or at mid, if you're at entry level or mid level in your career, you'll find this helpful, and you're able to take some nuggets of what I have to share and implement in your day-to-day as a designer or as a product manager, or just find some inspiration. All right, so all set for the expectation. I guess I'll start with my presentation. So my name is Carol Massa. I don't know if you looked me up on LinkedIn yet. Feel free to add me there. Just look for my name, Carol Massa, the way that it's on the screen. You'll find me. I work at Harmonic Design. Harmonic Design is an Atlanta-based design studio. Atlanta, Georgia, United States. And then we're a small group of designers. Currently we're 12. And then mostly what we do, we're a design consultancy firm, basically, in terms of, market. And we come in, we work with and within organizations, and we help them to become more customer, human-centric, but also enable them with tools so that they can become design-led organizations. So I'll go over a couple of things that I've learned. And this talk is actually a collection of thoughts and some things that I've been experiencing. So you're gonna see some models, some frameworks, some visual cues, and I really want to make this very participatory and inclusive. So when I get to points in the conversation, I'll stop real quick and open up to take a couple of questions. If you have a comment you really want to talk about, just feel free to go ahead and express your thoughts. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. What I want to start doing is to ask you to imagine a couple of different things. And the first thing that I want you to think about is perspectives. I'll walk you through a couple of scenarios where I want to show you the power of being able to see across different perspectives. And if I could invite you today to actually think about zooming out from where you are today. You could be doing a picnic. I wish we were doing a picnic in the park. Or you could be at home, just reading, thinking, working. And if you have the power to zoom all the way out to space and go all the way in a galaxy far, far away, you probably would see something like this. You probably would see, colors, shapes, patterns, textures, and dimensions of things that you usually don't see, visually in front of you. And that gives us a sense of how small we are in all of this, right? And then imagine now if you could zoom in all the way into your biology and your DNA. And actually, let's consider for now, if you could look into a grain of sand, it would look something like this. And it will also actually provide you with patterns, colors, and shapes, just like you saw when you zoomed out, but they have different expressions, visual expressions, and they really make you feel like you are seeing things differently. There is one dimension, though, that came into play in our daily lives, and actually, most recently, around 50 to 60 years ago, but especially a month ago, that is helping shape our day-to-day lives, and that's the dimension of technology. And what's interesting about the perspective, if you actually put all of the data and information that you produce with technology, it would look something like this. This is actually from Google. This is a data viz of different patterns of data. And you can see, just like you saw in the stars in the galaxy, the grain of sand, you also see some interconnections. You also see some conglomerates of networks and how everything is very interrelated. And it's very fluid and flexible and colorful. So why am I saying all this? Well, because if I bring it to reality, even in my career, I've been experiencing with different perspectives as well. I started in fashion, went to web design, did some advertising work, ended up doing research, and then went back to school and started to develop my strategy skills. And now I find myself in the world of service design. I find myself looking at this holistic perspective. And I just want to share some thoughts with you on why I think we have such an impact in organizations, and why do I think we can really play with strategy, play in a good way, because designers love to play, designers love to design. And that's me, that's what I am. And I'm also bringing some perspective from my company, my organization, Harmonic, on how we deal with things. So for that matter, I want to start by giving you an example on how I deconstructed a service that I actually use pretty often. And I don't know if you have this type of service in your city or in your country, so I'm curious to hear when we do a quick break to hear, if you have services like this. But what I want to do with you now is walk you through a dry cleaning service that I use pretty much all the time. But what's interesting about this interaction that I have with the service is that it feels very seamless to me and very magical in a way as well. So what happens in this service is I had to sign up online, and they send me this bag that you see on the left, and I just put all my dry cleaning clothes on it. And there's a locker on my mailroom in my apartment complex. I literally, all I have to do is to put the bag inside the closet, come up with a code to lock it, and then immediately triggers me to receive a message saying that the clothes will be picked up at this locker. If I have any questions about the order, I can contact them via my channel of choice. And then a couple of days later, I open up the locker and it's there, as you see on the right, it's ready to be used. So I think as a woman, I think it's perfect and very useful, very convenient. And it's something that saves me time to do things that I love, like spending time with my dog, or even doing design work. So the point that I'm trying to make is, if you think about the service model of this service, there's a triad of relationship that I want to emphasize here. So the first one being the consumer. So me or any other person that is using a dry cleaning service. And that consumer is the way that you see that your perspective is that I know that I have a tag with my name on, and I know that my clothes will get back to me at some point. So that's my perspective of what I expect from the service, right? So the moment you interact and start to visualize the second participant of the service, which is the actual service provider, is when you receive the notification of your clothes have been, we'll pick up your clothes at this location, your order, and they walk you through, so they keep track of the order for you when it's when they did the inventory, and even when at the end, when the clothes are back in. So it's a very, it's an exchange of information that keeps you in a way safe, knowing that they're taking care of your clothes in this way. I know it sounds very capitalistic, but it's an interesting service to look at. And then the third triad of the service model is the medium. Medium is any type of inanimated objects that you interact with during the service. So for example, the locker, the notification system, the bag. So anything you can think of that brings together this relationship between the consumer and the service provider. And not to say that all of them have equal representation, or the mediums are a little slightly smaller, but what I'm trying to show here is that when you start to deconstruct the service model, you actually see how intertwined they are and how interdependent they need to be for you to orchestrate this experience. And then I feel like, part of being able to understand the impact of designing a service, you have to start by understanding the services around you and how they work and what they're exchanging in terms of value, not only for yourself, but the whole ecosystem. And then what is important also to do is to compare and contrast with other types of design. I know that this brings a lot of interesting tension between, UI, UX, ID, visual design. But for example, if I could provide you with a comparison that I would make here would be, so in industrial design, the material that they work with to make things, to design things, are very physical, and you talk about textures and materials. In visual design, what you have is visual components, right? When you design a poster, when you design visual elements digitally. In UI, you have wireframe components, sitemaps, you name it. But then the material of service design is actually organizations. And this is a point of view that not only I believe in, but my colleague Stephen Taylor from Harmonic, he actually has a whole blog that explains why this is our, why we believe this is the main role of service design. Because when you try to explain to people what service design is, they don't know how to place it. They don't know, it's not there yet. I hope someday it will infuse and diffuse in people's minds, like architecture. People don't question what architecture is. But the way that I see this, that we can play with, and I want you to take this perspective as we go through this presentation, is that our material is organizations. And I have here an exercise that a mapping exercise that I've been working on for the past year, and I call the design spectrum. And what this is because the field of design expanded, beautifully into so many different pieces, I have a hard time trying to place first what I do as a service designer, and then second, where the other design fields fit in. And the way that I started to do this exercise was actually thinking about, okay, I'm a designer, so I produce something, so I deliver outputs, whatever shape or form that might look like. And it actually becomes like, I could classify them from a tangible output to an intangible output. So I just want to show you this real quick, and we'll do a break to talk about this a little bit further, and I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. So what I decided to do, I just chose a couple of, not all the design disciplines, because I don't even know if I know all the design disciplines exist right now. But I decided to start with traditional design disciplines, right? So you have architecture, you have interior design, you have visual design, and all these things. And then I started, okay, so in the past, I don't know, 150 years, what other disciplines emerged? And then I started mapping them. And what happened was they ended up, somehow the newest one ended up all the way to the left, being more the outputs that produce the design outputs that were produced by those disciplines. It's not that you can't absorb them or interact with them. It's just that they became more intangible. And that's, again, my personal perspective on how I mapped this. But this is making sense to me. And I've been pressure testing with other people, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then what happened was I was like, okay, but our design outputs, are they only existing or being measured by how tangible or intangible they are? What happens if I built another axis or another dimension here of the gestalt, because everything we do, we consider the parts and the whole. How would that look like if I mapped and added an axis with those disciplines in mind? So actually what happened was, again, what proved me, almost added to my point of view before producing, design producing from tangible to intangible. When you consider the newest disciplines, you're actually thinking more systematically. You're actually thinking about how the outputs, the intangible outputs, can produce some effect in a systemic way. Not to say, for example, that the UX design outputs are not considering the parts and the whole, but the bulk of the outputs, they actually live in this really interesting mix of all this. And some, even service designers might say that when they look at this, and I had people giving me that feedback, they actually feel that they're really close to UX design, living in the midst of all this. And even when you're implementing a service, you actually go further to the right to become more tangible. And then here, just a couple of examples how I frame this. So for example, in architecture, what you build is a building, right? So it's very tangible. You can see it, you can be in there. And in service design, an output could actually be just a conversation script. And that script could transcend across media, across channels, and it can take any shape or form. In UX, for example, the RAM that they work with is more digital. It's in digital environments, so they are building digital experiences. So the second part that I wanted to bring it to your attention is, so the first section we talked about perspectives and changing perspectives and thinking about different ways service design can work, different material, the material of organization being service, the material service design being organizations. And now I want to add to that thread a little bit with an argument that I've been a fan of that argument for as long as I'm a designer, because I actually started to solidify that argument most recently, where organizations are, in my opinion, living entities. What do I mean by that? So think about inside an organization, think about just, for a second with me, bear with me. Think about an organization, how it all starts and how it all evolves, and eventually probably some organizations even die, right? The organizations have to be adaptable to be able to thrive with all the changes that happen around them. And there's this expert called Eric Degels, so you can see it on the bottom right, his last name. And there's this book called Living Organizations. I don't know if you've heard about that before. And it's really, it's almost like a Bible to me, because this quote from him where he says, all companies learn, all companies build relationships with other entities. It's so true. And I see it every day at my work in Harmonic. I see how when we get to an organization and start to dig into their settings and to the structure and see how everything is interconnected, you even find policies and processes that go from HR all the way to designers. And I'm not only thinking about projects, I'm thinking about individuals. So for that matter, in this perspective, what is the point I'm trying to make is organizations are complex organisms, and by being complex, they live, and they're very organic in a way. If we think about the individual side of things and going into zooming in again in a person that lives in an organization, that single organism of a person has its own constraints, your personal constraints and external constraints. So things like a person might have in terms of their resources, their relationships, the culture that they are born in, the time that they're living right now. But they're also in their single organism, they're also dealing with external constraints of the community that they might live in, the decision makers of the country that they live, the policies, the environment, all these things you can't control. And we're actually living this bubble right now when you as a single organism is constrained to be home, but it's still expected to perform as a person because you're a person. You need to interact with people. You have your life, you have your relationships, you have your culture, your work. So it's interesting to think about that and bring it to an organization setting, how you have multiple people, multiple biases living in this organization, and that's what organizations are. Organizations are made by people, right? They're made by people. They're for people, and they build this organic network. And you can even think of silly examples such as you become friends with people you work with. You depend on some people when you're doing a type of work. You might even in a personal matter, you might even wait for a couple of documentations that you need to get so that then you could perform an HR task. So let me build a little bit more on that thought. So the impact that service design might produce in organizations, it might come at a micro and a macro scale. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In a micro scale, what I just mentioned, right? You have the organization as a living entity, and as a living entity, they have a core of things. So they have a mission, they have a vision, they have values, and you have the people around them that it's feeding off of this core. But also at a micro scale, when service design works with organizations, we're adding this ring of the extra rings of the ecosystem around process and even culture, which is something culture can't be built, but you can provide the conditions on your design, the way you work with the organization to actually enable a different type of culture or a different type of artifacts or activities that might in the future impact the ways in which their culture is shaped. And then I'll make it more real for you. I just went all the way to a very philosophical expert point of view on living entities, from coming back to service design. The way that we make our impact in organizations, understanding that they are living entities, is by looking at horizon lines. So when we work with clients at a micro scale, looking at their own organization, we come across this diagram as you see it here from from different types of engagements we can work with them in. And again, I'm coming from a consultant outside in perspective. So when we work with organizations on the optimization horizon line, we're working with them to basically improve what they have, make it better, optimize touch points in a almost sometimes in a singular scale or singular moments. We are helping them make bridges across channels, but most of all, we're trying to reduce inefficiencies, and not only process efficiencies, but also things that can be automated, things that can be expanded or replicated into different channels, right? And this horizon, it's very easy. There are metrics today that make it very easy to provide an immediate impact. And most of the organizations we work with, they want to live in that horizon line because that helps them see, you know, an increase of ROI, NPS score, employee satisfaction score. So that makes it very real for them. But in terms of designing that experience, you're in that realm of let's make it better. In contrast, when you think about when we work with them to think about reimagining the service, we're actually making it different and better. So we're making the experience, the service experience, almost transformative, not all the way to innovation, but it's starting to redesign operations to fit into this new reimagined experience. We're helping them extend the ecosystem that they live in, and actually building or rearranging, I would say that's a better word, rearranging the metrics that their organization is the foundation of the organization has. So things like the ROE that they might have, getting new metrics that for employee satisfaction, sometimes that you can consider a new metric here to be a new scorecard for your employees, the way that they're measured, the process that they come in during onboarding. That could be another reimagining scenario here. And then when you get to the innovation horizon line, which, you know, as the further out you go in this model, the more time you're going to need engaging with the organization, and more time you're going to need to work on that, because innovation doesn't happen from, you know, for 20 hours. It's not it's not a design sprint. It's not, and again, my opinion, it's not a design sprint. It's not something you can do in the room one time and say that you innovated. It's a constant reminder on how we can make, how we can build new services, how we can extend even further the ecosystem of offerings, how that you can actually create new operations and ways and enable them different ways to operate and provide to the customer and the employees this new experience. And some metrics, they usually probably don't exist. A lot of companies that I've worked with, they actually consider in this stage to actually move from ROI to OKRs, where they aim for a goal they aim for an objective and not from revenue. So that's a big shift. And some companies, they want to get there, but the structure that they have in place is not enabling them to get there. So it's a constant work, and it's interesting to see how they move across this horizon line and how we've been helping them do that. And we can talk more about that when we open up for questions as well. And then here, it's the transition design slide that I mentioned a little bit earlier, where when we actually try to open up the service design impact that could have in the realm of designing for interactions, it feels very humble, because it's right close to where products are. And some people may or may not agree with this diagram. I use this diagram because I feel like it represents where we can make change and where our role can actually provide an impact in a larger scale. And also for us to use it as an inspiration on where our practice could go. Like, I don't feel we have explored enough in terms of designing services all the way to being radical in building new paradigms and systems from a service design perspective. So I do feel like consider this visual as an inspiration on all of the rounds we can still go for in terms of designing for service. But right now, where we sit, it's pretty much what is illustrated here. We're a little bit further out from products and the world that we interact with and the things and services we interact with. But then we go a little further out where we, according to those horizon lines, right? When we innovate, we're producing moderate change. We are, but we're still dealing with existing paradigms and systems, not systems as technology systems. The systems here is systems, for example, transportation systems, right? And I'll give you an example to make it more real. So Uber, some people might consider, yes, Uber, and I was actually talking to my CEO the other day. He's like, well, Uber is a new, it's a new paradigm. It's a new system. I was like, well, when I interpret what Uber did for the market itself, and I feel like it's still in the realm of transportation. It changed the way we interact with vehicles, but it didn't necessarily provide you, again, my opinion, it didn't provide you almost like a collapse on the transportation system to actually build another way of even defining what transportation is. Maybe in some aspects it might have done it, but probably didn't go all the way that it could have been disrupted, right? Because it caused a lot of clashes in policies, the same way Airbnb, and when you start to make that analysis, we can talk about this all day too. And then just to answer the question around transition design, I'll just go back here a little bit further. So transition design actually deals with, they have 4 different core attributes to consider inside the discipline. They call it theories of change, design as the main focus of all this, and the other 2 I can't recall it right now, but I can follow up on that. And what they do is they are thinking the outputs of that discipline. It's actually redefining what transportation is. It's actually redefining, from the Uber example, is, do we need transportation in the first place? What are we trying to do that transportation is enabling us in the society today? And how can we completely change, radically change that paradigm of transportation? Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna do a quick time check because I can't visualize here. Okay, great. Let me pause here a little again and take up a couple of questions, and then we have our last section of this presentation. All right, so when we think about service design in an organization setting, there are actually a couple of things that you need to consider to even begin to describe the role of the service design of a service design, or even the service design in its pure form. So, and this is what I've been working on. So you have to consider, first of all, geography. Where is this organization located? The size of the organization. Not that it matters for everything, but it does matter in terms of the approach you're trying to build, and the ecosystem. So the number of people you have, the actors in the ecosystem that you have to play with. The market that they inserted in, because there are certain expectations in the market that organization is settled in, that you have to consider when you're trying to define what service design means for them in that perspective, and the industry you're inserted in. Market and industry are, attributes that feel fairly close, but on the industry perspective, there are some things that happen in the industry that you have to keep an eye on, especially for disruptive technologies that might come in place, or even how each setting influence one another. So you might have something happening in the geography that your organization is placed in that might influence all the other ones. So these 4 core elements really helps me define the setting that I'm dealing with, the organization setting that I'm dealing with. And then what happens is I'm able to, considering those 4 elements, I actually found it easier to explain the role of service design in 2 main settings. So the setting of the corporate setting, the in-house perspective, the role of the service designer here, it can take many different forms. And here's a list that I've been working on, and again, this is work in progress, of all the types of service designers that might live in a corporate setting. You might have service designers that actually their title are design researchers or UX researchers, and they live in the research team. You have UX, UI designers that live in agile pods or agile teams like Spotify, for example. You have service designers probably living in design ops, design operations, where they're designing processes. Service designers that are called design thinkers that live in the innovation labs, for example. And in more traditional medium to large size organization, you might still find, customer experience departments because they expanded so big. And inside those departments, you find experienced designers, experienced strategists, and which is, I wish we had more, but there are roles in leadership, right? It's still rare, but there are service designers that might be head of design or chief design officers, or even depending on the organization structure you have, you might even find design managers playing a leadership role in some corporate settings. And their main contribution in that setting is that the designers here are part of the service experience implementation. They are able to identify and actually act on pieces of the parts, going back to the parts and the whole we talked about in the beginning. They're actually assigned to a piece of the journey or even a piece of the feature of the service that they're able to work towards the implementation. And sometimes what happens, and one of the main challenges here, is that you lose the big picture, right? You get assigned to this project that speaks to a piece of the experience, but you don't get to, most of the time, you don't get to be able to see the whole experience and how it's shaping together. And also another main challenge here is that if you're able, even when you're building your little piece of the experience, you might find some insights that actually speaks to the entire way that the organization or the service is set up. So being able to get buy-in on that strategic find, it can be really hard, because you probably, depending again how the organization is structured, you might not have that full visibility, and you may not be able to provide that insight across the organization. But what you can do is, and I encourage, my colleagues and my other designers that know me, and we've been talking about this, what we recommend, and it's something that sometimes it's crucial to bringing service design into the organization, is to find champions of design. It doesn't even have to be service design. Just having the right frame of mind towards a design-driven outcome makes that person an advocate for that process. And the more advocates, the more champions you find in your corporate setting, you will eventually, you know, and it's, again, it takes time, you could eventually be very successful to start shaping that mindset internally. In a consultancy setting, that happens a little bit different. What happens is that a service designer here, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, because our projects can be in different organizations, we're constantly building cross-disciplinary approaches that deal with tools, methods, engagements, all of what is planned to work with the organization. They morph in a very rapid way. So we're wearing all the design hats all the time. What is interesting about the perspective here of the contribution, the value that designer brings in this setting in organizations is that we're bringing an outside-in perspective. We're bringing a different type of holistic view to the organization that they probably haven't thought about before, because they're maintaining, right, that environment, that setting that the organization is living. So it is we can be very helpful on them getting that point of view, that perspective. But again, there are challenges, and some very interesting ones that come into play here, because we're dealing with multiple organizations. Each organization speaks a different language. Actually, at Harmonic, and the projects that I've been involved with, we build a glossary from day one of all the different acronyms that we start hearing in stakeholder interviews, during the employee interviews, and the ways in which even their metrics, their business metrics might have a different name that you might even haven't heard before. So we're constantly learning. And it's a challenge because you have to adapt so quickly to that language so that you can communicate them in the same level, right? And another thing that sometimes it happens to me, and it happens, you know, very constantly if you're working in this setting, is that the recommendations you provide at the end of the engagement may not make it to the full, it may not flourish, it may not make it all the way to implementation, not even planning sometimes, because you get more stakeholders in, and they'll probably shift the organization's priorities, and that the recommendations you provide to them probably might be put on hold or even cast out. So that happens. You know, it's part of being in this setting. And then the other thing is that you have to be very careful of, and I feel like it's connected to all the two above, is that you are seeing an outsider, because you are coming in as an outsider, and that's the part of the value you bring. But depending on who you engage with and how you shape your approach, you have to be on the lookout for those for people that might be disruptors and may not allow you to fully help them, because their frame of mind has been, you know, for 20, 30 years in the organization, been doing the same thing every day, and it has been working so far. So for them, it's really hard to see people coming in, and we have to be very mindful of that, to engage them. And then the solve for this, the way that we do at Harmonic, is we build hybrid teams where we actually train the people that work with us to actually bring in the methods that we use with them throughout the engagement, so that at the end of the engagement, when we leave, they're able to be those advocates, or even be able to teach other people to become advocates of the process. So the more you bring people in when you're coming in from this outside-in perspective, the more you bring people in during workshops, during research, doing data synthesis, even creating concepts and new experiences, the more you bring them into your process and invite them in to the backstage, the easier it gets for you to get there, for you both to collaborate, basically. And then here, and that's the last piece, I want to walk you through the model that I've been working with for a couple of years now, but it's actually inspired by a couple of theories that have out there since the 60s, actually, where this model has helped me has enabled me to talk to people about how they can build their own models to shift from operations to design-driven mindsets. And just to give a little bit of the background of this, not only myself have been working on this, my CEO from the company have been working on this, and there are a couple of authors here. I mentioned 2 books on the left, The Connected Company from Dave Gray, and The Org Design for Design Org from Peter Merrill. Both of them mention this podular system, and there's a theory from the 60s from Holarchy, sorry, it's hard to pronounce, that speaks to this, and this modular system also speaks to the point of view that I've been bringing in today about living entities, living systems, living organizations. What happens in this pods, the dynamic that the design team pods bring, is that it actually makes the team very autonomous and very accountable for their own skills and intelligence, which enables creativity. So the theory behind it here is that if you enable this team to do their job driven by the same outputs and having this cross collaboration to develop a service or product or anything, they're able to actually be more efficient because the structure of the organization is enabling people to tap into their creativity. They're able to combine multiple pods and multiple sizes, and I'll show you that a little bit more. They're able to sorry, something pop up here. They're able to actually build a structure that helps the organization be flexible, adaptable, and resilient. I'll show you how it is. I'll give you a couple of examples how it could look like. And where service design comes in, it actually builds this thread across these multiple pods of design teams that can help make the main role here of a service designer in this model is to reassure that the experience, whatever is being produced is striving for continuity. It's striving for the flow of the experience and being able to continuously work across channels. So it's a very interesting way to look at how can service design actually make bridges inside organizations. And I have here a couple of models that I've been playing with different scales, and I'm not sure. So it would be interesting to hear if the scale that I've built here relates to the type of organization you work in. So for example, going back again to this model, if we're talking about small size organizations where you have these design pods and you have UX projects, service design or a service designer can be the connector between 2 projects. To make sure that the features don't overlap, to make sure that the different page, I'll give a very tangible example here. The multiple pages of the website, are able to communicate the same look and feel. The communication thread is solid and it's not duplicate. On a medium-sized organization, you might find a service designer, and this is again the ideal state, and it's a model that can help strive for experience consistency and continuity. In a medium-sized organization, when you partner with senior leaders across initiatives in the organization, you're able to connect and report to and strive for that initiative to be successful, because you're making bridges at a mid leadership level. In a large organization, what happens is, because there's so many departments and so many people, consider this to be a couple of 10,000 people, you know, or I don't know, 60,000 people, a couple of thousand people here, where a service designer can pair up across leaders to strive for a business goal. So over here, we're talking about the business goal example here is the OKR, for example. If the organization has a business goal as an OKR about being able to provide the customers an additional channel to communicate their needs. By knowing that business goal, the service designer paired up across leaders can ensure the teams underneath them, they're aiming towards that goal in a bigger scale. So to summarize, if I could summarize, which is not fair, all this content into a sentence, and this is the message that I was trying to bring it to you today, is that the way that I interpret the strategic role of service design organization is to identify the right level of impact according to your organizational setting by designing meaningful resources. And when I say meaningful resources, I mean people, process, platform, initiatives, projects, anything that you're able to work with to serve both providers, which is your own organization if you're in-house, and consumers of the service. So being able to identify the level of impact considering your setting, and being mindful of the type of resources you can tap into to provide value for both sides of the service, it's golden. It's something you know, that I've been trying to do in my journey here as a service designer. I just wanted to end up with a couple of pictures of most recent workshops, which are, you know, at this time of at this point in time, we haven't been able to do a lot of in-person. So I miss, I miss that collective thinking moment. But we've been transitioning to more digital engagements like this one. This one's a great example, to help people get the same outputs that we would produce in person, or at least have most of the main goal is reached, right? So I'm gonna pause here. I saw the chat popping up with a couple of comments here. Does this mean you don't see, Brian, thank you for your comment. Just reading through. And then Marcella, does this mean you don't see the service designer as part of the team, but more as a stakeholder of the teams? That's a great question. It depends on the role so I guess my point of view here, it's coming from a connector of things, not necessarily a stakeholder. It's more of a catalyst of different ways of thinking and collaborating. It may not exist as a person doing that. It might just be the essence of what service design is. And in some organizations, for example, I'll give an example, and I hope this helps answer this. Some organizations, some mid-sized organization, mid to large-size organizations, they are structured in journeys. So a service designer that works in one journey, you might have a service designer working one journey and another service designer working in another journey of the entire organization. And they should be able to communicate and collaborate across those journeys. And they actually may not have a higher hierarchical role, but they are doing the part of the connection. Does that make sense what I'm saying? They're playing the role of the connector without necessarily being at a level that they are leaders, but they are doing their work across. Oh, yes, thanks. Okay, great. Glad I'm making sense. I wonder if we have, so it's 1:10. I know we're wrapping up at 1:30. I want to make sure we get to the exercise. Let's do a 5-minute break. Is that okay? I said 10 many times, but can we do a 5 real quick? Come back in 5, and when you come back, check the chat window. You'll see a link to a virtual board, and that's where I'll meet you in 5. When you click on that link, and feel free to take a break now, but when you click on that link, make sure you open either on Firefox or Chrome. Safari, it won't work as well. So just bear with me there, and make sure when you click on the link, you just copy paste to the browser, to the web browser, that it's either Firefox or Chrome. So I'll see you in 5. Thank you.